Hi boys and girls, I'm here to read to you Almost Super chapters 19 and 20. Let's get started on page 189. This is no ordinary glove compartment. The city dump wasn't hard to get to. We loaded our bikes on the 259 bus heading north. We got off at Lincoln and then it was a short bike ride to the dump. The wind against my hands and face was bitter cold. When we were almost there, Benny was the first to spot the device. "What is that?" he asked. I looked where he pointed. At first, I couldn't see anything special. And then I saw it. Just above the mounds of garbage, a large white sphere sitting atop the cell tower. It looked like a giant golf ball. "Has that always been there?" Benny asked. "I've never seen it before," Juanita said. The gate to the dump was locked. We threw our bikes in the bushes and climbed the chain link fence. As a law-abiding citizen, I would never consider entering city property. But we were in superhero mode, and the superhero code allowed it. As we got closer, I could see the sphere better. It wasn't a smooth ball, but was made up of a lot of hexagons. It reminded me of a 20-sided die. "Should we call Dad?" Benny asked. "If we can get all the superheroes here, maybe we can figure out what's going on." I weighed our options. If we call Dad, I said, and Juanita calls in the Johnsons, do you think they'll let us stay? Or will we just be the kids without the super suits again? Benny didn't have to answer. "Let's take a look around first," I said. "We can call him backup if we decide we need it." Walls of garbage stood between the tower and us. "How do you think we get there?" I asked. Juanita pulled out her phone and brought up a satellite map of the area. "This way," she said. And she was off and running. The whole thing looked like a maze to me, but Juanita seemed sure. She led us through piles of garbage and eventually came to a stop. I almost ran into her. It was a full minute before Benny came to a stop next to us, gasping. "Doing push-ups does not help you run faster," he said when he finally caught his breath. "You guys didn't save the day without me, did you? Although technically, I guess it would be saving the night." I smiled in the darkness. "No, nobody has saved the night, but that's what we're up against," I pointed. At the base of the tower was a black van. About 10 feet away was an old-style RV that looked like an enormous egg. It had a door and a window on the side facing us. The window was either dirty, foggy, or both. Someone moved around inside the RV. Benny looked over at me and Juanita. "A van and an old RV? We can totally handle that. It's not even a cool van like the ones we have at our motor pool." "I don't know," Juanita said to Benny. "I think you had it right the first time. I think we should call our families. Someone's moving around inside that RV." She pointed up at the white sphere. "Look at those scorch marks. And can you smell the sulfur in the air?" From where we were standing, I could see black smudges against the white wall of the sphere. "It smells like the time I tried to microwave an egg wrapped in tinfoil," Benny said. I didn't want to watch somebody else save the day. "The van's empty," I said. "You guys can call him back up if you want. I'm going to see who's in that RV." I crept forward, my feet crunching on the ice. I heard Benny and Juanita follow. I started to make my way to the window of the RV where I saw the handle on the door turn. I ran towards the front of the van, ducking down against the headlights. In a few seconds, Juanita and Benny were crouched beside me. I heard the door to the RV swing open. I got down on my hands and knees and peered under the van in time to see Boots step down from the RV and walk towards us. For a split second, I pictured the owner of the Boots getting into the van, starting it up and shining his lights right into our eyes. But the Boots went to the back of the van, then disappeared as the person climbed in through the trunk. I placed my hand on the front bumper and could feel the van shake as somebody moved around inside. A minute passed, then another. I heard the trunk door open and watched as the Boots moved from the van back to the RV, then disappeared inside. "Come on," I said, moving to the back of the van. I opened the door as quietly as I could and slipped inside. Benny and Juanita followed. A dome light bathed the inside of the van in a dim yellow glow. The seats in the back had been stripped out and the only windows were on the back doors. Metal shelves lined the walls. It felt more like a cage than a vehicle. Fast food wrappers were scattered around the area. The van smelled like rancid grease. The shelves and floor were covered with electronics, wires, circuit boards, cords. It looked like somebody had taken apart 50 computers and thrown them around in here. "This looks like a supervillain's van to me," Benny said. Juanita kicked a crumpled fast food sack. Benny poked through the shelves in the back. I kept watch out the window to make sure nobody was coming. Juanita moved to the front of the vehicle. "Look what I found," she whispered. In the dim light, I could see what she held up. Then the object in her palm was glowing. A phone? Benny moved to look over Juanita's shoulder. The day we met in the library, I was headed home when this strange guy in pajamas, a stocking cap, and a trench coat stopped and pointed a phone at me. Did he have a fake beard? Benny asked. We saw the same guy. Do you remember, Rafter? I nodded. We thought he was a Johnson. Yeah, Juanita said. And I thought he was a Bailey, but this phone looks exactly like what he was pointing at me. I couldn't be sure, but I thought Juanita might be right. The phone looked familiar. Juanita began flipping through screens. Let's see what this thing can do. I looked out the window again to make sure we were still alone. Benny whispered from the front of the van, Holy gravy, will you look at that? I spun around, my heart thumping. What is it? What's wrong? Look at this glove compartment, Benny said. What? I asked. He's got a T9 installed, Benny said. I'd recognize a T9 anywhere. Juanita, whose head had been bouncing back and forth between Benny and me like she was watching tennis, finally asked, Your parents don't let you out much, do they? This is no ordinary glove compartment, Benny said. You can put up to 2.7 sticks of dynamite in this baby, and there wouldn't be any... Benny, I said, now is not the time or place for a discussion on glove compartments. Why don't you look inside the glove compartment and see if you can find who owns this van? Are you crazy? Benny said. You can't break into a T9. The only way we can get in there is if... Oh, it's unlocked. Never mind. If we're right, I said, this van will be owned by somebody named October, last initial J. October is such a funny name, Benny said as he shuffled through papers he'd pulled out of the glove compartment. Juanita continued to tap at the phone with a finger while keeping an eye out the back window. I found the registration, Benny whispered from the front. It's not October. The guy who owns this van's name is Charles. Charles Jones. Jones? October J. October Jones. I'm embarrassed it took me so long. We weren't dealing with a single supervillain. We were dealing with a whole other family. Instead of three kids up against a single person, we were now 3 kids up against who knows how many people. I came to the uncomfortable realization that I was very likely way out of my league. I looked back to Benny. Okay, I said, Benny, call Grandpa. Juanita, you call. Juanita sounded like she was in a daze. I don't believe it, she said. What? Benny and I said at the same time. When I saw the pajama man, Juanita said, he pointed this device at me and then laughed. I figured the phone told him told him what my power was. I'd guessed the same thing. But this does more than that, Juanita's eyes shined. This is the device. This controls that tower out there, which controls our powers. This thing can give a superhero worthless powers, or we can use it to get our real powers back. It took a moment to process what Juanita was saying. Our real powers. Juanita held our real powers in the palm of her hand. Juanita, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Are you telling me that all you have to do is push a few buttons and we can finally be super? Juanita didn't have time to answer. The door opened behind me and somebody grabbed the collar of my coat and dragged me out of the back of the van. Something crazy. All right, on to page 197, chapter 20. It's probably safe to assume you don't get invited to a lot of parties. My feet slipped on the ice and I fell to the ground. I watched as a man jumped inside the van. There were the sounds of a brief struggle, and then the man came back out, holding the phone Juanita had just shown us a moment before. It was Pajama Man, the same one who had confronted Benny and me in front of our school. He wore the same stocking cap he'd had on when we saw him at school. He was tall and thin with dark eyes that sat under fat and fiery eyebrows. He wore heavy black boots and a thick coat. Juanita squatted just inside the van. Benny came out the side door. He looked like he was ready for a fight. I didn't think either one of them realized how much trouble we were in. The henchman pushed a few buttons on the phone and then slipped it into his pocket. So what kind of critters have infested my van? My hand edged towards the phone in my pocket. Come, my dear. The man motioned to Juanita through the back door. It must be stuffy in there. Feel free to step out into the fragrant night air. The man spread out his hands and smiled. I would introduce myself, but I think I prefer anonymity. I decided to press my luck. You don't need to introduce yourself, Charles. The man spun around to face me, his eyes becoming thin slits. How much do you know, boy? I said nothing. Let him wonder how much I knew. This was an especially good tactic, since the sad truth was I knew next to nothing. Well, it doesn't matter, Charles said, waving his hand. He turned to face Juanita. Please, step outside. I put my hand in my pocket and grasped my phone. I tried to look casual. Charles stood there, his arms folded with an I hate you smile on his face. It sounds like you three have been doing your homework. You've discovered something about our little family, have you? That's too bad. People don't live very long once they've met the Joneses. Juanita looked surprised, but she recovered almost immediately. Your family sounds like a cheery bunch, she said, climbing out of the fan. It's probably safe to assume you don't get invited to a lot of parties. Pass me your phones, Charles said, snapping his fingers. In an instant, my brain formulated a plan. There were 3 of us. He couldn't catch us all at once. Run! I shouted, pulling the phone out of my pocket. Run and call for help! It was a good plan. It should have worked, only it didn't. One moment I was running, moving away from the van, and the next moment I wasn't moving at all. A brief moment of disorientation and then nothing. Looking down at my feet, I realized I was 12 inches off the ground. I was flying. And that's the end of chapter 20. Keep reading to find out what happens next.